3 weeks later, Karen's victory had turned into a nightmare. The Hendersons' pool had indeed become a breeding ground, not just for mosquitoes, but for Karen's growing obsession with winning at all costs. She'd issued 14 separate violation notices, each one more creative than the last. Failure to maintain aesthetic standards, creating a public nuisance, and her personal favorite, violation of water feature regulations. Tom Henderson had responded to exactly none of them. Karen paced her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. Listening to the city planning office put her on hold for the third time that morning. She called every municipal department she could find, but the response was always the same. Removing a pool on private property didn't require city permits, and the HOA's architectural review process had no legal standing for demolition projects. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, hanging up and immediately dialing the non-emergency police line. "Sunnydale Heights Police, how can I help you?" "This is Karen Bellwether, president of the Sunnydale Heights HOA. I need to report ongoing property violations at 1247 Maple Grove Lane." "Ma'am, we've received several calls from you about this address. As we've explained, HOA violations are civil matters, not criminal ones." Karen's grip tightened on the phone. "Officer, this man is destroying neighborhood property values with his negligence. That's economic terrorism." A long pause. "Ma'am, I'm going to transfer you to our community mediation services." "Don't you dare." The line went dead. Karen stared at her phone, feeling the walls of her perfectly controlled world beginning to crack. She built her identity around being the neighborhood's protector, the one person who could maintain order in an increasingly chaotic world. The thought of Tom Henderson simply ignoring her authority was unbearable. She grabbed her keys and marched across the street, her designer heels clicking against the pavement like bullets. The pool area was worse than ever. Stagnant water had turned green, and the smell of decay hung in the air. Tom was in his garden, tending to his tomatoes. He looked up as Karen approached, and she was surprised to see him smile. "Karen, perfect timing. I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" Karen blinked, thrown off balance. "Your violation notices helped me realize something important. I looked up the actual HOA bylaws, not just your interpretation of them. Turns out, there's nothing in our covenant about pool removal. Nothing at all." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Section 4.7 clearly states. Section 4.7 is about new construction and modifications. I'm not adding anything or modifying anything. I'm removing something that's already here. Tom's smile widened. "I also discovered that several of your other violations have no basis in our actual governing documents." "That's impossible." Karen stammered. "I've been president for 7 years. I know every rule." "You know your rules," Tom interrupted gently. "But they're not necessarily the community's rules. I've been talking to other neighbors, Karen. You'd be surprised how many people have stories about your creative interpretations." Karen felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "You're questioning my authority?" "I'm questioning your understanding of your authority," Tom corrected. "There's a difference." "I'll call an emergency HOA meeting," Karen said, her voice rising. "I'll have you removed from the community if necessary." "On what grounds?" "For wanting to remove a safety hazard from my own property." Tom shook his head. "Karen, I think you need to step back and really look at what you're fighting for here." But Karen was already walking away, her mind racing. Tom Henderson had just declared war on everything she'd built. He was challenging not just her decision, but her competence, her knowledge, her very identity as the neighborhood's guardian. She spent the rest of the afternoon crafting what she considered her masterpiece, a comprehensive violation notice that cited 17 different infractions, from failure to maintain water features to creating attractive nuisances for children. She even included a section about violation of community aesthetic standards through willful negligence. At 8 p.m., she marched back to Tom's house and taped the notice to his front door. As she turned to leave, she noticed curtains twitching in windows up and down the street. Her neighbors were watching. "Good," she thought. "Let them see what happens when someone challenges the rules." But as she walked home, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that she was no longer the hero of the story. The way Tom had looked at her, not with fear or anger, but with something approaching pity, made her stomach clench with an emotion she refused to name. The next morning, Karen woke to find her masterpiece violation notice lying crumpled on her own front porch. Attached to it was a handwritten note. "Karen, this ends now. Tom." She stood in her doorway, still in her silk pajamas, staring at the returned document. In 7 years as HOA president, no one had ever had the audacity to return her violation notices. The disrespect was breathtaking. By 9 a.m., she was dressed and ready for war. She called the police department directly, demanding to speak to a supervisor about what she termed ongoing harassment and property destruction. "Ma'am, returning a piece of paper isn't property destruction," the desk sergeant explained with barely concealed amusement. "It's intimidation," Karen insisted, "and the pool situation is creating a public health hazard. Stagnant water, mosquitoes, potential contamination. Have you contacted the health department?" "Of course I have," Karen snapped. "They said it's not their jurisdiction unless the water is actually contaminated." "Then I'm not sure what you want us to do." Karen's voice reached a new octave. "I want you to enforce the law. This man is destroying our neighborhood." "Ma'am, I'm going to be very clear with you. HOA violations are civil matters. Unless someone is breaking actual laws, we can't help you. And frankly, you've called us so many times about this that my officers are starting to recognize your voice." The humiliation burned in Karen's chest. "So you're just going to let him get away with this?" "Get away with what? Removing a pool from his own property?" The line went quiet. Karen felt the full weight of how her crusade must sound to an outsider, but she was too deep in now to back down. "Fine," she said. "If you won't help me, I'll handle this myself." She spent the next hour crafting what she called her nuclear option, a letter to the entire neighborhood announcing an emergency HOA meeting to discuss Tom Henderson's ongoing violations and the need for immediate action to protect our community standards. She printed 47 copies and began her distribution route. The first few houses went smoothly, but by the 5th stop, she noticed something odd. Mrs. Patterson from 1255 actually read the letter while Karen stood there. "Karen, this is about Tom's pool?" Mrs. Patterson asked, confused. "Among other things, yes. But honey, that pool has been an eyesore for months. We're all glad he's finally doing something about it." Karen blinked. "But the process?" "What process?" "He's cleaning up his own backyard." Mrs. Patterson handed the letter back. "I won't be attending this meeting." The same scene repeated at house after house. Neighbors who had always smiled and nodded at Karen's previous crusades were suddenly questioning her judgment. By the time she reached the end of the street, she'd distributed only 12 letters, and several of those had been returned immediately. That evening, Karen sat in the community center, staring at 7 empty chairs. Only 3 neighbors had shown up. Elderly Mr. Kowalski, who attended every meeting regardless of topic, Sarah Chen, who seemed to be there more out of curiosity than support, and surprisingly, Tom Henderson himself. "Well," Karen began, trying to project authority to her sparse audience, "I've called this meeting to address the ongoing violations at 1247 Maple Grove." Tom raised his hand. "Before we begin, I'd like to read something." "This isn't a public comment period. It's our actual HOA bylaws," Tom interrupted, pulling out a thick folder. Specifically, the sections about pool maintenance and removal. Karen's stomach dropped. "That's not necessary." "I think it is." Tom opened the folder and began reading. Section 8.3. Homeowners are responsible for maintaining all water features in safe and sanitary condition. Section 8.4. Homeowners may remove water features that pose safety hazards without prior approval, provided removal is completed within 90 days of initial assessment. The room was silent. Karen stared at Tom, her mind racing. That's not how I remember it." "These are the original bylaws, Karen, the ones we all signed when we bought our homes." Tom's voice was gentle but firm. "I've also brought copies of the past 3 years' meeting minutes. Would you like me to read the part where you convinced everyone to approve your aesthetic guidelines that somehow never made it into the official bylaws?" Sarah Chen spoke up. "Wait, Are you saying some of Karen's rules aren't actually official? I'm saying there's a difference between neighborhood guidelines and legally binding covenants, Tom replied. And I think we've all been confusing the two. Karen felt the last of her authority crumbling. I've been protecting this neighborhood for 7 years, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. No, Karen, Tom said softly. You've been controlling it. There's a difference. The meeting dissolved after that. Mr. Kowalski shuffled out, muttering about wasted time. Sarah Chen left with a copy of the actual bylaws, shaking her head. Karen sat alone in the community center, staring at the empty chairs, wondering how her perfect system had fallen apart so quickly. The next morning, she watched from her window as Tom's excavator returned. This time, she didn't rush outside. She didn't call the police. She just watched as the machine began its work, removing the pool that had become the symbol of her failed crusade. But as the excavator's bucket bit into the concrete, Karen felt something unexpected, not defeat, but curiosity. For the first time in years, she wondered what would happen next in her neighborhood, and realized she no longer had any idea how to control it. The thought was terrifying, and somehow, almost liberating. Karen Bellwether's morning yoga routine came to an abrupt halt when she spotted the massive excavator rolling down Maple Grove Lane. Her green smoothie slipped from her manicured fingers, splattering across her pristine white yoga mat as she pressed her face against the living room window. The machine was heading straight for 1247 Maple Grove, the Hendersons' house, and Karen's blood pressure spiked instantly. Absolutely not, she muttered, grabbing her HOA violation clipboard from the kitchen counter. As president of the Sunnydale Heights Homeowners Association, Karen had maintained their neighborhood's property values for 7 years through sheer force of will and an encyclopedic knowledge of community guidelines. No one, and she meant no one, was conducting unauthorized construction on her watch. She marched across the street in her designer athleisure wear, her blonde bob bouncing with each determined step. The excavator operator, a weathered man in his 50s, was already positioning his machine near the Hendersons' backyard pool. Excuse me, Karen's voice cut through the morning air like a fire alarm. Do you have permits for this operation? The operator looked down at her with mild amusement. Ma'am, I'm just here to remove a pool. The homeowner hired me. The homeowner, Karen spat, is in violation of Section 4.7 of our community guidelines. Any structural modifications require HOA approval, which I can assure you was never submitted. She brandished her clipboard like a weapon. I'm issuing a cease and desist order. Lady, you can't. I'm not lady. I'm Mrs. Bellwether, HOA president. Karen's voice rose to a pitch that made nearby dogs whimper. And I absolutely can stop this illegal activity. Tom Henderson emerged from his house, coffee mug in hand, looking exhausted. At 62, the recently retired teacher had been dealing with Karen's harassment for months. Karen, we discussed this. The pool is cracked beyond repair, and we can't afford to fix it. We're removing it. You discussed nothing with me, Karen shot back. You filed no paperwork. You scheduled no inspection. This is a clear violation of our architectural review process. It's my property, Tom said quietly. Your property exists within our community covenant, Karen replied, her voice dripping with condescension. When you bought here, you agreed to maintain neighborhood standards. A gaping hole where your pool used to be is hardly maintaining anything. The excavator operator cleared his throat. Folks, I've got 3 more jobs today. Are we doing this or not? Karen stepped directly in front of the machine. You'll move this equipment immediately, or I'm calling the police. Tom's face reddened. Karen, you can't be serious. Dead serious. She pulled out her phone with theatrical flair. I'm also calling the city planning office and the building inspector. This entire operation is illegal until proper documentation is filed and approved. The pool is a safety hazard, Tom pleaded. The concrete is cracking, the liner is torn, and it's becoming a breeding ground for mosquitoes. Then you should have thought of that before letting it deteriorate, Karen snapped. Your negligence doesn't justify breaking community rules. The excavator operator shook his head and began shutting down his machine. I'm not getting paid enough to deal with this drama. Call me when you folks sort this out. As the machine rumbled away, Karen felt the familiar surge of victory. She had protected her neighborhood once again. Tom Henderson stood in his driveway, watching his last hope for affordable pool removal disappear around the corner. This isn't over, he said quietly. Karen smiled coldly. No, it's not. You'll be receiving a formal violation notice within 24 hours. And Tom, she paused for effect. Next time, follow the rules. But as she walked back to her house, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that Tom's resigned expression held something more dangerous than defeat. Something that looked almost like determination.